Hey guys, it is February 12th, 2026 here with your after hours recap. Well, this one should be, fairly self-explanatory. If you just look at AEHR here in my chart, this is was a snapshot of the market. So with that, I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Have a good one. No, I'm kidding. Um, but that's kind of what it was. It was one of those days where you could kind of feel the risk off right from the start. And obviously, it was led by Apple. At one point, this thing was down 5% on the day. And it really wasn't just led by Apple. Also, I've been kind of talking about XLF hanging right on the 200 simple moving average. And you break it today in a pretty decisive way. And while you were losing the XLF, you had the XLP going higher. And guys, I've made mention of this going back now, it feels like 10 days. When you have toilet paper leading financials, it's a risk-off environment. That does not mean that there aren't things that can go higher. There are indeed things going higher. Look at the XLP. But what's happening here is, you're losing financials. You've got mega caps acting very poor, right? Meta, very poor, living underneath the 200 simple moving average. Microsoft continuing to act poor. You've got former leaders, which nobody wants to just digest the reality. Robinhood in a stage 4 downtrend. Yes, at any moment, could you get a snapback rally? Of course you can, but you're in a stage 4 downtrend. Palantir, you're in a stage 4 downtrend. AppLovin, you're in a stage 4 downtrend. And the amount of pushback that I get from people when I say that their favorite stock over the last couple of years, Robinhood or Palantir, is in a stage 4 downtrend is unbelievable. And people just obviously, they just can't face the reality. But it is what it is, and you just got to learn to move on with life until this stock sets up properly back above the 200 simple moving average. No questions asked. It just is what it is. So it was just kind of one of those environments where the money was flowing and continues to flow out of tech, out of large caps, right? You don't want to see one of the best companies of the market over the last couple of months, start to break and live below the 50 simple moving average. Well, here is Google. And then you've got Nvidia, and obviously you're still within the super choppy range, and it seems pretty simple. You break this lower boundary, right? You break about 170, maybe even 175 bucks, a little bit higher up here. That's going to signal some risk off once you get below the 200 simple moving average. Not necessarily what you want to see. And then today, silver cracked in a pretty hard way, and gold cracked in a pretty hard way, and I shorted some NEM myself. So this was a pretty simple short. As soon as you started to see some selling literally come on in here, I was getting short this thing 123 and change. So you just see the selling come in. You see silver starting to roll over. You see financials kind of losing it. You see the pressure in the market, and it was fairly easy to get short. Yes, there are some things trying to go higher. Obviously, Corning, GLW being one of these names that just continues to hold itself up well. Micron continues to hold up fairly well. SNDK continues to hold up, pretty dang well. But again, one of those environments where it's difficult. There is not a lot going on in terms of the growth side. There are some things that are pretty interesting. Obviously, FSLY was a big one today, at one point up 90%. Very nice. And if anybody caught this early on in the morning, congratulations. I mean, that's just unbelievable. ANET is another one of those that are heading higher. So hopefully, we can continue to see, an ANET gapping up in after hours. We could see this thing continue to stick. That would be pretty nice. And obviously, ANET's a fairly quality company, so seeing this thing go higher, that would be pretty good. And then AMAT and after hours as well, gapping up to a new high, also up double digits, almost 14%. So for me, it's one of those environments where I'm not really chasing any gap ups. The market hasn't proven to me that it deserves a gap up being chased. We're just continuing to be in a sloppy environment. When you think about the QQQ, where you break down, you try to rally back up into the 50, you don't quite get there, and then you break down again today with some more distribution. Not very good when I kind of look at it, and I'm thinking we can play out a whole lot like this, where you have the highs of 21, you rallied up nicely, and eventually you broke down right to that level, and then you've rallied up nicely. Do we eventually try to break down to that level? I don't want to make any assumptions at all. Obviously, you're still living above the 200 simple moving average, and you also should have some support at that 580 level. So I don't really know, nor do I really care. The reality here is there's just not a lot that is buyable. For me, I added on a piece to AVGO. I shorted this thing against the 50 a few days ago, added on another little piece today. EQT, which I picked up yesterday, kind of nothing. My XOM, which I did, trim off very, very nicely yesterday, as you got 10 times, 11 times at one point. It's ATR from the 50, and I even mentioned this. You got to be diligent and, paying yourself on the way up. I did just that on XOM the whole way up. Very, very nice to see. Even got paid a little dividend today, so that's awesome. And my VLO pulled back pretty hard, and then I picked up an SQQQ hedge yesterday, and then today off to the races. Yeah, slight little gap down in after hours, but we'll see if this thing ends up pushing higher, if the QQQ decides to roll over. And Netflix today at one point was just getting absolutely murdered. Finished down almost 5%. I continue to hold this one. I did trim off another tiny little piece of this today, right? Starting to get a little pickup in volume, starting to accelerate to the downside. But, I'm not going to be too surprised if we are, breaking 70 in a couple of days on this name either. Cryptos continue to act fairly weak. Software continues to act pretty weak. Trucking today actually was the one thing that got hit pretty hard outside of gold and silver. Silver was the one place, precious metals and mining, the next one, gold, the next group that got hit, and then trucking, next. And obviously a lot of that had to do with this RXO, but even, an Old Dominion was almost down 5%, today, right into the 20-day. So we'll kind of see what happens there, and even an XPO, a bit of a pullback as well. But ultimately, names that have pushed out really, really well deserve a little bit of sideways, and there would be nothing wrong with that. Again, consumer staples continues to be the place where money is going. And then food distribution today was the, leading group, and it was led by USFD. Just a gigantic move on this name, and then PFGC was the other one. Not names that I'm ever going to find myself trading in any kind of way, but nice little tennis ball action on earnings, getting right back up above the 200 simple moving average. Does this performance food group company keep going? I mean, I don't know, but it's not sexy stuff. Grocery stores were higher today. The XLU was higher today, so utilities, coming back in a pretty vicious way. So, it's utilities, consumer staples, losing banks. That doesn't scream risk on. Hopefully semiconductors can kind of stick around, but we'll see. I've been saying it for a little bit. It's a little bit of a difficult environment, but today, fairly nice day. AVGO was really nice to me. SQQQ was really nice to me. Watching Netflix roll over was very, very nice. And then getting a short on NEM was also really nice. And I do think that if, and I still kind of look at silver, and I want to say that I believe silver has topped. And I really haven't touched it since I was shorting, this extension from the 50. Got this really, really nice move, and then you've just consolidated near the lower half of this range, and now you're starting to roll over. Don't be too surprised if we're all the way back down to these October highs. I know nobody really wants to believe it, but that's what happens in the metals, in the commodities. When they go parabolic, when they blow off, they eventually unwind the entire thing. Don't be too surprised if that's happening. I'm looking at gold, and at the very least, don't be too surprised if we are making our way down to the 50 simple moving average, even if we went lower also to these October highs. Do not be entirely surprised. I think that is totally possible, in which case I'm happy to be short NEM. It's the one ticker within the gold space where I've been able to trade it to the long side, and now hopefully I've been able to hold it to the downside. So Yeah, we'll see what happens with some of these earnings names, AMAT, ANET, but I don't think that this market has shown you any reason whatsoever to be buying a gap up. Does the market eventually, and I think it does, right? It's like, do we get more pain? I don't know, but the market at some point in software is going to have a snapback rally, but that does not mean a renewed uptrend, despite people's popular beliefs for bottom fishing. And even though I also played the IGV, and I started to sell some the second day, and then I sold a bunch into the 10-day, and then I got rid of the rest yesterday. Fine, cool, little wallet patter. But if you just keep kind of bottom fishing, just because you nail it for a week or 2 weeks does not mean that you have caught the low in software. So that's just kind of my thoughts. Obviously, if you have an Apple coming down lower, Microsoft continuing lower, Nvidia possibly breaking down, Meta below the 200, AMD not looking too good, Amazon not looking too good. This looks poor for Amazon, to say the least. And it's just like everywhere you look down the list in terms of mega caps. God forbid we start to lose a Micron and a WDC and a SanDisk and a Corning and a LITE. We'll really be out of like growth names to trade. Although optics and memories are the place to be at the moment. Names can only swim upstream for so long. I don't have a short on any of those names. I think that there's at the moment a little bit lower hanging fruit. I could see the market snapping right back tomorrow, and then those memory stocks going even higher, and I don't really want any kind of headache with it at the moment, versus something like iron just a couple of days ago, where's the best spot to short? Right against the 50-day. Something like AVGO, where's the best spot to short? Right against the 50-day. And we've been seeing this theme over and over and over and over and over. That setup where you rally into the declining 50 simple moving average, and then 3, 4, 5 days later, you are rolling right back over. And you could look at it on pretty much anything. On a CrowdStrike, did this exact thing where you rally into the declining 50, you roll over. Coinbase did this exact same thing where you rally into the declining 50 and you rolled over. MicroStrategy did the exact same thing. You rally into the 50, you rolled over. The Quantums did the exact same thing. You rally into the 50 and then you rolled over. And, even your Uber did the exact same thing where you rallied into the 50 and rolled over, and once again into the 50 and ultimately rolled over. And that's what happens when charts are undergoing distribution. They run into their declining moving averages and they roll over. And now you've got some stocks that are, darlings of FinTwit, Palantir, Robinhood, and everybody and everywhere I see it, and AppLovin included, everybody talks about how undervalued and how great these things are for the future. And that sounds good if you're an investor and you don't even care about watching your money go down another 30 or 40 or 50 or 60%, because that's what can happen. I'm not saying that's going to happen with a Palantir, but it could go down another 30. Wouldn't really surprise me. It could go down to $80. That wouldn't surprise me. $90 wouldn't throw me for a loop. That's just what happens to some stocks once they top, and it'll be painful. And it's not until the people loudest on some of these tickers at 160, 170, 180, how amazing these names were. Once they get super, super, super quiet, that's probably when we're getting towards the end of some of the carnage. But Bitcoin's doing it to a lot of the loudest people over the last couple of months, and it's probably going to be something very similar for a lot of these growth names, as well as they are now in stage for downtrends, Uber included. And I happen to like Uber, so it's tough. It's humbling for some people. I know yesterday, I tried buying Enphase. I got stopped out, and then I'm looking at Enphase today, and at one point this thing's down double digits. So, it looks good for a moment, and then it's rolling over. Somebody yesterday during pre-market prep was like, man, I should have just bought the hell out of AEHR. It's like, why? The market has not shown you any reason to chase a gap up at all. Well, here you go. That's why, right? That's like the market has not given you a single reason to chase a gap up, even if you think it's good for just a day, right? Even something like NET, right? You think it's good chasing a gap up, you get crushed. You think it's right back off and off to the races today, and then it's right back down. And the reality is a lot of stuff just does not look good at the moment. So look for lows if you must. I know I've kind of been on the short side. I've been on the long side for energies. Finally, energies take a little bit of a breather today. Was not very expected or unexpected on my part, so no big deal. Kind of prepared for it, and the shorts today at least made up for the pullbacks in the energies. And if those break down, they break down. It was a fantastic trade at this point with very little size. Not very little size, but a whole lot less size than I had when I initially bought it left. So we'll see what happens with a name like AMAT. This will be a great study for tomorrow. Does the market reward, great earnings, or does the market, sell some of this stuff off for people who are chasing on these gap ups? But, as far as I'm concerned, ANET could continue to go higher. I don't know. No dog in the fight. No setup for me anyway, and I'm definitely not chasing an earnings gap up in this environment. So hopefully you guys all stayed safe, and I will see you guys bright and early tomorrow morning. Cheers.